This episode is brought to you by our partnership with Grand Canyon University.
Hey there, welcome to the Ignite Project. I'm Jessica Solano, Teacher Engagement Leader with Polk County Public Schools, and today we have a very special segment that we've never done before to celebrate our year and a half of doing the Ignite Project together. You get to meet the entire teacher engagement team. And so y'all have met Mallory before, but we are using this opportunity to introduce Emily Diggs,
Happy to be here.
Our newest teacher engagement coordinator. Super excited. Emily is able to, she coordinates our all-teacher seminars, the Extending Excellence program when it comes back, culture ambassadors, affinity groups, the whole slew of new teachers, culture-related stuff. So,
yeah, love being here.
Yeah. She's getting her feet wet. She's going to start on the podcast very, very soon.
Yes.
But we wanted to use this opportunity really to kind of take a break right before the holidays to be able to look back and think, hey, where have we been? Right, so we know where we're going and starting the new year fresh. And so we're a year and a half in, 1.5 in the season.
It's been a journey.
Yes. We've been able to kind of look back at where we've come from to the episodes that we're doing now. And it's only been a season, but it's so interesting to see how much has changed, but then also how much has stayed the same. And so I think a great place to start is really thinking about Amber Screen, because she hit on our very first episode talking about empathy. And that theme keeps coming back over and over again.
Always it does. And I think that we did a good job starting off with that episode, but it's always a game changer when we're recommending episodes to people and we're just like, hey, this is one you really need to listen to because it's so powerful. There's so much compacted and said into one episode. Mm-hmm. It was really awesome. And I think that we started off with a bang and that we're able to come back to it. It's been really cool.
Well, and it's cool because we're trying to look at different clips because we want you all to hear it. It's kind of like teasers so you can go back and listen to the episodes later. But so many, for sure, in Amber's, especially even just how she defines empathy and how it can look so different based on the different speakers that we had in the different situations. So let's listen real quick to kind of start us off with how she defines empathy.
To me, the short answer is putting yourself in the shoes of someone else and feeling what they feel first, and then responding to them like you would want to be responded to in those same shoes. So it's different to say, oh, I feel sorry for you, or dang, it's sad that your mom may be on drugs or you didn't have any sleep last night. But when you are in that position to say, my mom was on drugs and I know how it feels not to sleep the night prior, then you deal with someone different because that's your experience. And so you deal with them, if that were me, how would I have wanted my teacher to bring me in when I didn't sleep the night before? Makes a world of difference in the connection that you have with the student and what you get out of the student or even adults, believe it or not.
Awesome. I think she does it exactly perfect. Putting yourself in other people's shoes. Sometimes we think empathy, compassion, sympathy, aren't they all kind of like the same thing? And she just words it perfect because it's having to understand their situation from their perspective. Not that you ever would have had to always go through their situations, but understanding it and feeling it the way that they're feeling it.
Yeah. It goes back to a lot of what we're talking about in Leading from the Classroom, where Brene Brown, Dare to Lead, talks about empathy versus sympathy, and she goes into those examples of we're easy to jump in and say, oh, but I've gone through a scenario that's like this, or I've kind of felt this, so I kind of have an understanding of what you're going through. And before doing that, I love that she just emphasizes you need to put yourself in their shoes first. However, you also need to think about how would you like to be approached in this situation? And I think because of lack of time or because of heightened emotion, sometimes we don't take the time to really do that first and take the time to really settle with that before we approach the empathy method. So it's very clear to follow her definition. So
yeah. Later in the episode, she talks about how it's having heart space for your students. And that, what a better way to say that?
Yeah.
Making room for your kids both in their shoes and just in your heart, seeing where they're coming from.
Right. These are real people.
Yeah.
I think it's hard when you see them every day.
Yeah.
I used to work at this fancy restaurant, and the managers would tell us, I know you get to be here every day, so this seems like a normal working environment. But some people come here once in their entire life, right? So we think of seeing it like that. Make the heart space and see these people for what they are, which is people.
Yeah.
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 I'd love to, like, in putting ourselves in their shoes, like getting out of the way, like you were saying, about, like, it's not about you. We don't need to hear your story. Someone's saying, oh my goodness, I just found out I have cancer. You don't need to say that you had cancer, right? Maybe you just need to listen and feel how they're feeling.
And don't pretend like you know.
Right.
Like say, I think later she even says, it's okay to say, I have no idea how this must feel, but I'm here.
Yeah.
What can I do? I'm here.
Right.
And how powerful is that? Not just saying, oh, that's too bad, and kind of being done.
Right.
But really just sitting in it with them.
It's so hard to do, though. Your gut reaction is to find a connection with someone, right? You want to comment because you want to feel that connection. You want to feel what they're feeling and sit with them on that. But if there's anything I've learned over the year for so many opportunities of it's okay, it's going to be so hard to just like not say anything and just to sit with them and be with them. But really that's what they need. They want to be valued and heard and to be seen, and the way you do that is sometimes just by listening.
Right. We was talking with our teacher leaders about, like, sometimes I just want to be able to tell you I'm having this problem and I don't need you to come in and fix it. Even as, like, you know, talking about school problems, and here we are, like, well, we want to support you, but sometimes we might be over supporting someone when they really just need to feel heard. And not like, okay, well, here's how you fix it, move on. You know, because to them it might feel like, oh, I guess it wasn't that big of a deal because you just came up with a solution in 10 seconds.
Yeah.
I feel that way sometimes. My first year teaching, I would explain what my day looked like and what was really wearing on me to people who weren't teachers at home. And I finally, about halfway through the year, I just said, sometimes I just need you to say, that's really hard.
Yes.
And just let me sit with it. Or, you know, the first year of teaching's got to be the hardest. You got it. And just leaving it at that.
Right.
You know? And how cool is it that she can do that for her students?
Exactly. Well, and then later on in the clip, I love how she captures that with social media too.
Yeah.
Especially by making comments, literally. That was, just to kind of give some context too to our audience, we kicked off the Ignite project right as we were coming back to school after the pandemic had started. So we had March, April, May, virtual, immediately going into virtual teaching, distance learning. And then we started in August with a completely new, different looking school year, right? And that happens to be when the Ignite project came out. So she was our first one having gone through the pandemic. And if you were in education, you know, honestly, even if you weren't in education, you heard about education on social media.
All the time.
It was so ugly at that point. And so I love how she talked about social media and addressing the comments, the things that you see, and what she thinks about how empathy has to play into that. So let's take a listen to what she says.
Do people know that they're posting on social media and what they're saying? Yes. Do they know the gravity of their words? No. I don't think they do. Do they know how hurtful their words can be to others? I don't think they do. But I think the bigger issue is that's a hurt person. That's a broken person.
Yeah.
Someone who handles their business in that manner, that's a hurt person.
And then she goes on to talk about how can people change? That's a tough question to even answer too. That she thinks people can change, but it starts with getting to know people and empathizing with them, understanding the experiences that have led to the feelings that they have that are now coming across on social media for everyone to see. What are your thoughts on that?
You say something, I think, several times throughout the year last year that really connects with this, and I thought about that oftentimes when people are so vocal and so loud and they say such negative things, it's really because maybe somebody hasn't made the space to listen to them.
Right.
And to have that opportunity to share what they're feeling. And so when she says that's a hurt person, we have to remember that, we get this in our office all the time, that anybody who's taking that space to vent or share such negativity, it's because they feel maybe that's the only place they could. No one in their life or no one in their experience or history, what's true to them is that no one's taking the time to listen to me. And so I'm going to, in order to make change, I have to be loud.
Right.
And so sometimes in order to be loud, you're bringing the wrong kind of content
wrong kind of attention
on the wrong type of platform.
Right.
And so I love that she just reiterates we have to remember that sometimes the people who are the loudest or the most negative that's a hurt person. And so to take time to understand hey, if I give you space to listen, can we talk about this, even though we may disagree in the end? Like,
Right.
what does that look like? What does that sound like?
Absolutely.
And still extend the empathy to them.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
Like, sometimes it's the most difficult to extend it to them, but they're oftentimes the people that need it extended the most.
Right.
Yeah,
For sure.
I think if you don't see it as black and white, of like, okay, you said something I completely disagree with, so now I'm writing you off, right? And that unfortunately is like what's happening right now, or definitely was happening at that point, especially with everything politically, everything was going on. It was just a lot of black and white, and this is how it is, period. But getting to the point where I'm seeing them as a hurt person, and I'm able to say, I might not agree with what they're saying, but can I understand where they're coming from? That's such a huge part of what we're trying to do here. And I think she nails it. And which really kind of brings into the next kind of topic that we see a lot. We see empathy a lot, but really especially shifting our mindset and our attitudes to seeing people as hurt people, hurt adults and hurt kids. And wondering, how do we actually make change in a system that seems so gigantic and huge and uncontrollable? It seems like a lot of our guests that have been on here this past season and a half have really focused on shifting their own attitudes, because they're focused on, one, what can I control? But they're seeing that, you know what, maybe I'm the one that's getting in the way.
Yeah.
My attitude, I'm not doing this on purpose, obviously, but I can control what I do, and I'm seeing that what I do is actually negatively influencing some of the behavior and some of the outcomes that I'm seeing in my classroom. Adam Smith, I think, was a major one.
I love it.
So good.
So good. I love how he talks about addressing student misbehavior, and then honestly reflecting back on himself and saying, there's some times where it's so bad, like, I need to give myself a timeout. I love that he needed time to kind of breathe and de-escalate himself and not just jump into it and take it personally. So I love this clip about talking about how we're talked to and how we end up talking to our kids. I think he puts it perfect. So let's take a listen.
Who wants to do when you say you're going to do this right now? I mean, who can come say to that to you and you just, oh, okay,
Right.
thanks. I got my attitude right now. I'm good.
That's
You
right.
know, nobody wants to be talked to like that. So
Right.
I always try to remember that. Now, am I perfect about that? No, I'll make mistakes and I'll
Right.
raise my voice sometimes and say the things that I shouldn't say. And again, I should have given myself a timeout first. But again, it's recognizing that. And when we can recognize how a student, what's going to benefit the student the best,
Right.
then we can make those choices more consistently, and it flows, it works.
It does.
I love that. It's reevaluating how we're saying, I don't know, to me, because I've been there, I think we've probably all three been there, or listening to him say that, like, I might have said that once or twice in my classroom, or to my own kids. But I think when I'm in that space where I am getting upset and I'm talking like that to a student, I'm starting to take this personally. You know, you are giving me a hard time, you are purposely being defiant to me, you are not obeying my directions, and I'm taking it as an attack, and so I'm attacking back, instead of realizing I'm the adult here in the room. And like Adam is talking about, giving myself time to calm down. Not that it gives them permission to just go ahead and run all over you, but giving yourself that headspace to know you are human. You can act like this, but you've got to pull yourself out of it, or else you're going to act like that.
Yeah. I was, like in an early on teaching career, that mentality of drill sergeant, this is my room, I demand the respect, you will respect me. Sadly, like, I'll throw myself under the bus. That was like the mindset coming in.
Don't smile till Christmas.
Right. Which I was like, when I heard that I was
such
like,
a
oh
theme.
my gosh. And so I think that's such a, traditional, not agreeable with mentality, because they are human beings. And so when we talk about as an adult, if you want to be approached that way and somebody's telling me, like, getting loud, getting aggressive in my face, if we as teachers were taking a step out of our bodies and watching ourselves do that, I think even we would say, like, that's probably not the best approach.
Right.
But when you're in the moment, you're just like, it just is like a train 1,000 miles an hour, and you're like, I don't know how to stop this train. Should I stop it? I don't know how. So I love the timeout. I've given myself so many times timeouts in the past where the kids don't even know what's going on, but I just knew that I needed to take a step back to regather my thoughts so that I could approach them with a more loving, patient approach versus I'm going to get what I need out of you and get it right now, and I'm going to win. And it's not about win or lose.
Right.
It's about moving on so that everybody can understand what they're doing and understanding each other as a whole. So.
Yeah, nothing productive
Yeah.
happen when
nothing.
you're both at that level.
Yeah.
Like, not one or the other, when everybody's all heightened and everything. I love that he talked about having a safe space for people to make a mistake, not just students, but
Yeah.
like being able to go back and say, hey, buddy, like, I'm really sorry. Like, I handled that inappropriately. How powerful is that?
Right.
Whenever, like, people that you look up to can recognize that and tell you that. And what a great model for kids. Like,
Right.
hey, this is what it looks like. When you make a mistake, like, let's own it and move on. Get a fresh start moving forward.
Right. Especially, at the secondary level. You've been in middle school, your entire teaching career. We're coming from elementary. But to be able to model for our students who are changing and growing into little adults,
Yeah.
that's got to be powerful for them to be like, oh, dang, Miss Diggs just said she's sorry to me.
Yeah. Everybody has bad moments, and, adults, kids, everybody. So being able to see them the next day and still say, hey, hi, good to see you, welcome. Like, that's hugely powerful.
Absolutely.
So.
Yeah, I also think that language, they tend to like reflect what you're saying to them, and they'll turn around and say it to their peers in those
100%.
moments, and they're gonna be problem solvers for their own heated, situations and emotional situations. So it really does trickle, down to from student to student, friends to friends, colleagues to colleagues. It's just universally all a really good idea.
We're all modeling for each other.
Yeah, exactly. Take self-control. Right. I like how he keeps going because he talks about humbling yourself, which aligns totally with that it's not about you, but then also talking about building a relationship and knowing your students doesn't equate to a lack of boundaries in your classroom, because that is hard. It's not that, I'm giving you a timeout, so no. In the time that I'm taking a timeout, please feel free to destroy my classroom.
Do whatever.
Do whatever you want.
Yeah.
It's not that. Definitely, re-listen to the video if you haven't, because he does a really great job of outlining that, but knowing that I can still have high expectations, still have strong boundaries.
Right.
And still work in time for me to catch myself. And so that I think that works perfectly into Michelle Dinwiddie from the high school end now.
So powerful.
That progression of not just of knowing your students, but then getting out of our own headspace too to create these opportunities for them. I love how she describes it about creating this transformational teaching opportunity, but we can hold ourselves back from getting there if we in our head are saying, my kids can't do this, or I can't do this, or how does this even work? I don't know what I'm doing. She creates these opportunities because she's been able to rethink and get herself out of the way. So let's take a look at what she's talking about.
My encouragement is whatever gets the students focused on service above self, whatever encourages students to become more curious, whatever encourages students to form their own identities. And for the skeptics out there saying, yeah, you don't know my students, I would say there's no limitation whatsoever to teachers and what they can do to provide meaningful, nurturing experiences for their students. And in truth, the only thing I think holding us back would be our own attitudes about
Absolutely.
it. Yeah.
Right. She nails it. The only thing holding us back is our own attitudes.
So true.
Yeah.
That concept of service over self, I think when education, we focus so much on academics, and we, as teachers, and I'll say this to myself, I was so focused and clouded by data and where they need to be, and that pressure that comes, with where to pace them and how far we need to, to reach those goals and be successful. And so adding this element of service above self, it just really talks about, again, the understanding of the whole child, the human being behind it, and reflecting and modeling those skills so they can turn around and apply it outside of the classroom. And when we become so consumed with the data and so consumed with, where we need to be as teachers, that part is left out. And there's something so powerful about what we can say to our students and how we feel about them, and say, it's not just, do you understand the kids in my class? Because I don't think you know.
You haven't in my
Shifting
class.
that with that growth mindset of saying, do you understand the kids that I have? They're beyond incredible. They can achieve anything. And then back that up with that type of mentality that she's talking about.
Yeah, and she, earlier in the episode, I wrote it down because I loved it. She said students need to be doing all of the work. They are performing and shining while I'm backstage.
I love that.
I was like, oh my God.
And if you've ever been in her classroom, that's totally it.
Yeah.
It's totally student driven. No matter which student she's teaching, you would never know, because she has that expectation that she's leading from behind.
Yeah.
It's so awesome. But it's that total shift in attitude.
100%.
For sure.
Well, a lot of times we feel like with data, with all the standards we have to meet, everything we have to do, if we're not up front leading, then it's not happening. When really, the students who, the people who are doing the work are doing the most learning.
Right.
So if your students aren't doing the work, who's really doing the learning? So,
I got an A in my class all the time.
Yeah, right.
That's right. No, and I think that aligns really well with what you were talking about with apologizing and teaching. This is what it looks like. So soft skills. You can't have a lesson like Michelle has where I'm doing service over self and forming my own identity, but at the same time I don't know how to apologize. Like it's this all-encompassing type of view that you have to not only provide a lesson that's teaching these soft skills and 21st century skills, but also modeling that in everything you do. And I think that leads in perfectly then to Krista Stanley, who's our Florida Teacher of the Year, our only guest who's not been a Polk County teacher, but love to have her. And she did it really fabulously. She's also a middle school teacher who was reflective, especially in our first few years teaching, that she is a part of the problem and why her kids aren't growing the way that they do. And so she sets these goals for herself in front of her kids so that they see, oh, I'm not the only one that has set goals. I'm not the only one that has to look at my data or take tests or do anything. It was this kind of modeling still of you continue to grow even as you grow up. So let's listen to Krista's clip.
What I did was I reflected that evening and thought, I'm a big part of the problem. I realized, and this took much longer than that night. It took a few months of reflection, realizing that, when I first started teaching that I was committed to compliance instead of really planning rigorous lessons for my students and having those high expectations for them.
You know the phrase we're going to go to.
Yes. Hands down.
Who's going to say it first?
That's right. We're going to write this on the board and keep it there.
All capital letters.
Committed to compliance. That is so true. And when I think about that, I think about my evaluation, and I know I'm going to get my formal, and I'm going to check, all these things, not because it's actually good for student learning. I'm doing that because selfishly, I want to make sure I'm going to be highly effective. I want to make sure that I have this. And it can end up becoming a routine where they're just helping me check off the boxes, and it's not something that's authentic. Right. That they're actually taking ownership over, even if it means, like Michelle, I'm not in the front of the classroom.
Yeah. I think there's a difference between, again, it's so hard to make the shift of I'm just trying to get through the day, or I'm trying to get through the lesson, I'm trying to pace through the curriculum map. And again, we say this because we have been there and we have experienced it, and there's been a little bit of shame over it. But shifting that mentality of it may take so many more days to make sure that the rigor is there and the challenge is there, and where am I taking each student, differentiation versus let's just make sure I've done this. And some of the hardest lessons that I've had to like headaches resulting in tears, were sitting down with my grade level team and tackling what does this really mean as far as the standard, where am I taking each student. And so I think it's so humbling, and so it can be so hard to swallow that pride and say, like, I think I'm the problem. Like, she says that, and she's like, it takes so many nights of saying, like, okay, now that I recognize it, what now? What's next? That actionable plan. It's okay to be wrong, and it's okay for 8 years to have done this wrong, but the good thing is that you have an opportunity to pivot and start fresh, and I love that. Yeah.
100%.
It's totally in the attitude, too, of realizing just because you're not doing it in a way that's the most effective doesn't mean that everything you're doing is wrong or you're a horrible teacher.
Absolutely.
That, I think, is the big thing. I have never heard this phrase until I came here to the district office, but basically about the phrase, you're calling their baby ugly. So if I'm like, oh, I think this program, which is not my program, might go well if it had this feedback. Oh, you can't say that because you'll be calling their baby ugly. Yeah. And so I think that's it's the worst phrase.
But it's so memorable. You're like, oh gosh.
Because it is like my baby. So if I think about like leading from the classroom.
Oh gosh.
That's our baby. And so of course any feedback coming from outside might hurt, but really trying to shift my attitude to they're giving me feedback based on their perspective. It doesn't mean the whole program is terrible. Right. It doesn't mean I should just scratch it. Forget it. We won't ever do leading from the classroom again.
And it doesn't mean you're terrible.
It doesn't mean I'm terrible.
Yeah.
I'm a terrible program designer.
I think that's a big piece of it too. Is just being able to like reflect your own self and be able to hear what people are saying to you in a way that you can do something about it.
Yeah.
I think about our new teachers or people who are coming into the profession who are not education majors, and they look at people who've been in the classroom, and this happened to me with my co-teacher where somebody's been teaching 14 years, and they take a peek in the room or watch them teach, and they're like, I gotta be like that now.
Yeah.
And that's so debilitating. Like that's a mindset that we need to just shut down real quick and say, like, one day at a time, one thing at a time. As long as you're ever growing, ever building, that's the important part. And it's not because you're a bad teacher, and it's not because you're doing it wrong, just minor tweaks, because really you want what's best for the students if that's your mentality. And that's what it's gonna take.
Yeah.
So.
Well, I think one of the areas that people are most like that with, like, at some point I'm going to master this, to me, is classroom management and addressing student misbehavior.
Yes.
I'm like, I don't care how long you've been teaching.
No.
It's always something to learn. I would always use this system that I felt like worked, and it worked for about like 7 years. And then I had one class, so I was like, I don't know anything. None of this works.
You have to get out your first days of school book and like
Get the Harry log.
Yes.
Exactly. And that's part of continuing to learn. And so I think I've known, like, in the past, sometimes I'm having conversations with, like, well, when I become a really great teacher, then I won't have to work with these students. And so a lot of the people that we've been able to work with on the show do such an awesome job of saying, I get to work with those students. The students with behavior issues, or the students who make it a challenge to teach. And so I want to end with them, because they really are capturing the essence of our show, which is igniting a why in what we're doing. And this is their why, because of all the kids, there's going to be kids that show up that can probably teach themselves, and they will, whether I'm there or not, they're going to get an A in class.
That's right.
But then there's going to be other kids who need us to be on our best, and they're not the easiest to teach. So I love Odile Perez. She's talking, the ESOL teacher who comes in and talking about understanding the experiences of our ESOL students. Just kind of puts it in perspective of sometimes my norms and my experiences come out in how I'm teaching, but I might not be taking the time to understand the different experiences of my students, and that could be influencing their behavior, which maybe doesn't align with my expectations, and then now I'm disciplining them.
Right.
So let's take a listen to what she had to say about that.
There's so many things that could be a barrier. In my particular specialty or work, there's an ESOL, there's so many different things. It could be a language barrier, a cultural barrier, or just a system barrier. Because, for instance, something that we learned in the boot camp is silent solo, right? That's very common.
Yeah.
But if a student is just coming into the U.S., their system, they have maybe never done silent solo. They usually probably did a lot of collaborative teamwork, because there's a different cultural background. So we have to be careful of what we think is normal, or what should we expect the student to be doing.
This hit me. I really had a great opportunity of sitting with her and having a new teacher chat with her, and we met her from the boot camp.
New teacher boot camp,
she just was wondering, any person that you meet like that and just kind of like, oh, we need to know more. We could talk for hours on this.
She's sunshine.
Yeah,
really.
She's amazing. Always smiling, also kind. But what really struck me was that it's true that, again, sometimes I'm so selfish as a teacher, and I don't intend to be, but I'm so stuck on, this is what I need from you. And I really don't take the time to think about, do you understand what I need from you? And not just in a logical sense, but a cultural sense, a perspective sense. And, then to take the time of, you got to build the relationships with your students to better understand their needs and their wants. And I love that she framed it in the word of barriers. Yeah. Because you can take down barriers, and barriers, they don't always have to be up. They can be adapted and changed and removed. And so being able to recognize as a teacher all these variable barriers, and then that's going to strengthen our teaching skills and what we do in day-to-day with our students.
Yeah. 100%.
I loved it.
And it gets to that kind of that clarity that you're talking about. Like, maybe, are you not understanding what I need from you? And that really drives home the point of the clear is kind, is that we might think we're being clear, but if they have to keep coming back to you or showing you, I'm not understanding this, I'm not understanding this, then the communication is not happening. Yeah. Right? Not clear communication.
And just because you repeat the same direction 4 times doesn't mean they're going to understand it. And just because you're louder doesn't mean they're going to understand it. It's just one of those things where is there a part of this that you need help with clarifying before you say, like, oh, you're just out of compliance. You're being rebellious. Yeah. And so sometimes we tend to jump ship there instead of, going a step further.
Yeah. Our all teacher seminars, like, screaming in my ear. They're like, pay attention. What the heck does pay attention mean? I am. So I totally agree. It's being able to see those barriers is so powerful. Because at least you see them now. Before they were invisible and we couldn't figure it out.
Right.
And it may not happen right away.
Right.
But to take each experience and put them in your pocket and have that to re-access, it's going to take time, but at least you're now aware of it.
Yeah, you're more open-minded to the fact that I might be saying pay attention, and you are okay with I am paying attention, I'm taking notes, but I'm not looking at you. Right. But if you need me to look at you, to be that clear to say, I need your eyes on me, and focusing on that. So great, awesome parts there, especially with understanding your student and really digging into that. And then Brandy Kanoy at Jesse King Elementary.
Another one.
So they were like, which one are we going to take here? She is one that literally, if you asked her, she would use that word, I get to work with my students. And to the point where she even talks about how she requests for some of these students to be placed in her class.
Didn't she request to go to a school where she could be challenged by some of the more behavioral issues? I don't know if I want to address that, but I just did. But to me, that is powerful to take ownership over the fact that I want to necessarily go, I can go anywhere. I'm needed anywhere. But I want to go somewhere where I'm going to actually grow the most from that. Right. That when she's told us that, I was like, oof.
Well, and for those that don't know, we are paired with recruitment. So we are trying to get quality teachers here, and then in teacher engagement, we try to keep them here. And so especially someone like her who's a certified, coming from an ed program candidate, she really has anywhere that she could go and get hired. But what we're oftentimes seeing is that the schools that need the best teachers are not the schools that end up always getting the best teachers. Sometimes they end up getting the newest teachers. Right. And so, of course, she is still new, but still at the same time, you're getting a lot of people there because there are some major challenges there, especially when it comes to behavior. And so how different could it be if you get to work at these schools because you have mastered as much as you can, because we know we always keep growing, classroom management and working with students, and having this shift in attitude of, because you are so good at getting to know your students and building relationships with them and holding them to high expectations, you get to work at a school where they need you the most. Yeah. And you're making such a huge impact. I love that about her attitude and how she gets in on looking at those different strategies, telling her kids that even after you mess up, I still love you. Yeah. You're a person to me. So let's listen to her clip, especially when she's talking about the different strategies that she uses to get to know her students. And of course, like we will always end up getting down to, is how do we fit it in? The energy that it takes. I love her perspective.
Managing behavior takes a lot of work and energy, especially emotional energy. So when you're not having to invest that in a negative way, like, I'm putting it out a lot of energy to do these other things, but it's positive energy and not negative energy, which is far more draining for me anyhow. Yeah. So I feel like it balances itself out. And then also just thinking about getting kids that will work for you, right? Like, they're always going to volunteer to help do something or make my life easier because I've built that connection with them.
Yeah. To me, this kind of correlates with classroom management, right? Like, you've got to put your systems and routines and practice and invest all this time. But sometimes we don't always invest all of this time into relationship building year round. And I love how she captures that it's a lot of energy. That's a lot of energy addressing the behavior, which is negative energy, but it's also a lot of energy to build relationships, but at least it's positive energy. Right. And then relating that at the end too, and then it can help make your life easier because now you have the buy-in of your students and they want to help, instead of you really being on your own.
I think she calls it planting a seed.
Yeah.
And the way that she was talking about it, if I remember correctly, was you can plant a positive seed by the way you talk about and interact with your students, or you can plant a negative one that ultimately affects your kids in your classroom. So if you're talking about that student and their behaviors and all that stuff, are you planting a positive seed or a negative one?
Right.
And I love that analogy.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I think also she brings up, this is why you have to check out the episodes and listen for yourself. It was so good. The whole thing. Yeah. But she talks about prior years as a fifth grade teacher being at the top of your grade level. You'd often hear from prior teachers who've experienced or had that student. And she also mentions personalities. And so in fifth grade, personalities are shifting constantly. Hormonally, constantly is a giant roller coaster. Yeah. And to be able to say, if we can learn as colleagues to not necessarily provide all the feedback to the next grade level and maybe bring just, the positive feedback, and you can bring constructive positive feedback, but really it could depend on the personality from teacher to student or who's grouped with each other in that particular class. And so allowing time for that teacher to spend with a fresh start with that student and have that fresh slate and planting those positive seeds instead of already coming in with this mentality of like, oh, I know all about you.
Right.
You know, because that's so dangerous. That can really affect a student. That can really affect how a teacher approaches a student. And oftentimes it was like, I didn't want to necessarily go la 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 la, but I really wanted to build that, you know. And so I really, a lot of what Brandy said resonated, because I'm like, it's so true. You're going to have some of that negative energy that's not going to go away. That's going to show up from time to time because we're human beings. But what would you rather have? More positive energy than negative, or spend most of that time on that negative energy, you know, energy putting out these fires?
Right.
And so,
yeah. Well, and I think it's good for us to talk and collaborate with our colleagues and say, hey, man, this would be great. Even talk about, like, I wish I could talk to the 6th grade teachers after they leave you in 5th grade. But I think that's just a small tweak of tell the story, but tell it in a way that's positive. Like, it's not that it's not true. Like, hey, the student, John, in my classroom, he really has a strong personality. There are some times where he got really upset, but here's what I found that worked. And, or, you know, I'm still working on it. I can tell you what doesn't work. Don't pair him with this kid, or don't do this. But we've really got to, and see as a collaborative effort, that we need to figure out how to motivate him, or we need to figure out how to address him, or teach him how to properly handle some of these behaviors. Then it's different. Like, because help me out so I don't have to relearn it.
I like the strategy part. Definitely, like, bring that to the table for sure, because it's a game changer. You need to have that collaboration. But if you're just talking about this kid,
get ready.
It's very disheartening.
Well, and it goes back to planting a seed, because even then, even though you're not talking to the student, you're planting a seed in the next teacher's mind, which already is setting them up for failure. You know, and so that's taking that ownership of, you've got to do this. Some of us are teachers because we had great teachers planting seeds. I know for me, it was the teacher, the principal, and all the teachers who were like, Jessica's crazy. they're a little bit right. But I tell a story sometimes how my principal told my mom, you know, because I kept getting sent to the principal's office for being kind of out there. But can you believe it? I've totally changed. I'm a new person.
Totally changed.
But saying, he told my mom, and my 5th grade principal had told my mom, Jessica's never going to amount to anything. And so, and so that.
And look at you now.
But like, you're going to tell to an elementary schooler who's barely, you know, and this is, you know, way back then, but still, it's.
You remember it.
Yeah, it resonates.
Well, and thank God my mom didn't tell me. She told me eventually when I was like in school. But because she protected me from that. But imagine if I had heard that, if he had told me that, which I've seen teachers say a lot of things that I'm sure they don't intentionally mean to cause harm, but that would have caused harm to me to say, I am not smart. I am not like anybody else. I need to be normal. I need to fit in this box. And so I think that's part of planting those seeds and getting to know. It wasn't until I got to 5th grade, my first ever teacher, that was like, hey, I see you. Let's put you in there. And so I think all of that kind of coming together can either plant, like you're saying, bad seeds or good seeds to impact their future. And then I think that ends perfectly with our last one, Jan, your anchor from Bridge. And so she does a really great job of being able to kind of capture why every student deserves a teacher that believes in them. And her podcast is even, I think, called Every Student Deserves to Graduate. And so she is a high school reading teacher for students who may not be meeting those requirements in order to graduate. So she's working with a group of students that are tougher to kind of get through. And so I love her conversation with Tamika about the word failure. So let's listen to that.
Yeah, I don't like the word failure.
I can tell.
Yeah, we don't use that word in my room. And there are no failures in my room. No one. If they get a score back and they say, oh, I failed the test, I will look at them and say, you have failed nothing. There is no ability to fail. You just did not get the score that you wanted. I said, look where you were at the beginning of the year. You know, you had a 14, you now have an 18. Look at the growth that you've made.
Such a shift in attitude. Total shift. And it's, again, like we keep talking about, it's modeling for them. 14 to an 18, not a lot of growth, but it is growth.
There's growth.
Exactly.
Well, and celebrating successes. Like little successes. makes such a difference to everybody.
Right.
You don't want to wait till you're at the end of a race to go, woohoo! You want to, like, as soon as you meet those milestones, celebrate instead of feeling beat down the whole way through. So how cool that she's there with her students alongside them.
Right.
Yeah, it breaks that mind shift of, for so long we're driven to make A's, we're driven to make high scores, we're driven to pass because that's what society, that's what our teacher, that's what the school wants us to do. And so when we're approaching things like this within her classroom, where kids are already coming in and they don't want to be there, they don't want to do this, they already feel beat down. And so the resiliency is little to none.
Yeah.
And so how powerful and how difficult it must be to say this to them repeatedly, to break that mindset of this is not necessarily a performance-based classroom, this is a growth opportunity, because no matter what, we're going to get you where you need to be. So you have to trust me in that process. And I just love that she's like, that's not an option. Like, I don't even know what you're saying. Like, get that word out of here. Because she straight up is like, it's not that, it's this. And so bringing new language and new approach, and when she continues throughout the episode, she really is there for them. She shows up with them, so it's not just speaking truth and them listening and having that buy-in. It's everything that she does to ensure it models like this is what success really looks like and really feels like versus what you've been defined as for so long.
Yeah. And meeting them where they're at. Doesn't she talk about taking the ACT?
Yes. Yeah.
She takes it.
Yeah. She puts
as an
herself
adult, like,
in a new,
so that she can understand her students' mindset and help them prepare. Talk about
I know.
Where they're at. Like, oh
I'd
my
be
gosh.
like, all the test haters out there, like, oh gosh, there has to be another way.
Yeah, but just being able to meet them at that headspace and go, okay, here's how I felt. How did you feel? What can we do? What can we control?
Right.
Just like Amber was talking about in the first episode.
Right.
Like, it's all totally related.
I agree. And I think if you put them all together, it's in that line of thinking of, we got to stop doing what we've always done and thinking inside the box, and instead shifting that paradigm to, how can I reach my students? I'm not going to be perfect at everything, but how do I change that? Maybe I take the ACT. Maybe I go.
Maybe not.
What's option number 2? I think. That's right.
Yeah.
But yeah, thinking of things differently. Like with Adam, getting to know every single one of his students. With Michelle, completely transforming the way that she approaches lessons. I know Brandy, she would talk about going and watching like anime. And like, whew. But I'm looking, she at least likes football. But like really thinking outside the box as far as how am I going to be what my students need me to be. So just awesome, powerful stories. If we could really talk about every single one, we would have talked about every single one. But there's only so much time. But we thought it was only fair because we asked all of our guests the same question. We're laughing because
we're really under the spotlight.
I feel like I'm about to take the ACT.
That's right. We call this the Ignite Project, and every show we go through the same thing. This is the Ignite Project. The point of the Ignite Project is to be able to ignite a passion in other teachers. And what we've seen, just in the teachers we've seen here and in the whole podcast, is everyone has a different passion, but there's also so many commonalities here.
Yeah.
But how do you take that passion and then ignite a spark that leads to a wildfire in our educators, not just in Polk County, but in the whole country? Yeah. So we're going to ask each other this really quick, 30 seconds, wrapping us up. Emily, since you're new, we're going to start with you.
Oh, yes.
If you could pick one area in education to spark change and ignite a shift in behavior and mindsets, what would it be?
I think it would be collaboration. Yeah. Like authentic collaboration. So as a social studies, I'm still a social studies teacher. So as a social studies teacher, of course, I have a quote by one of my favorite historical figures,
I love it.
Teddy Roosevelt. One of my absolute favorite quotes about life, far and away the best prize that life has to offer is the chance to work hard at work worth doing.
I love that.
And I think us as teachers, we all feel that, but we feel siloed at times. So I think collaboration doesn't necessarily just mean with coworkers or people at your school or even with your students, but just being able to reach out and know that there's somebody there to lean on, and that you can leverage people's strengths. Right. How I was a success coach for about a year and a half before I got to join the team here, and I never noticed how many people are doing amazing work and are experts at what they're doing. Yeah. that are willing to help and be there,
Yeah.
but we just don't know that they're there.
Right.
Yeah.
So I think collaboration would be my answer.
Or we say too much like a competition and not collaboration. Like just because she's really great at this doesn't mean that I'm terrible at it. You know,
100%.
it's a teamwork.
Yeah.
You know, reach out and ask.
As I was thinking about this, the thing that kept coming to mind was passing the baton. But that's like become kind of a, they're passing the baton kind of thing. When really it's like when you're passing the baton, you trust the other person.
Right.
You're running alongside them. You're passing it to somebody who is meant for that role.
Yeah.
And it's not giving up. It's celebrating at the end or picking them up at the end of a lost race. It's being there in it with them.
Yeah.
So,
I love
so passing the baton in a good way.
collaborative.
Drop it.
We're a team.
Yes.
Yeah.
I love it. Mallory?
Interestingly enough, my deals, we did not.
I'm glad
I like her answer. Next. No.
I can change my
No. So I think my answer would have been different as a teacher.
Yeah.
Than now. So now that I've been in this position for 2 years and had a little bit of both sides, something I've gotten really passionate about is the collaboration between teacher life and administration. And so we've had countless conversations about this.
Right.
And so one thing that I think is I've had some life-changing mentors. I've also had some life-changing leaders who are admin, and I've had colleagues who have changed my life, and constantly over the 10 years, the thing that I feel like needs to happen is this gap that needs to be bridged between communicating with this administrator sees a bigger picture, maybe has the cover to the puzzle, and I have the pieces.
Right.
And in order for us to fit, in order for us to really reach some success and meet these goals is I need to connect with them. And so that obviously is hard when maybe you're not necessarily invested because you're all in the classroom. And, you know, I had a hard time seeing my principal as a human being. Like, if I'm like a student would see a kid at the grocery store, if you saw.
You don't live at school?
Yeah, your principal, like at the farmer's market, you're like, hi, boss. Like, that's you. Just double checking because you're wearing a hat. I've never seen you wear a hat before. That's right. But to go in, and Amber talks about this, is like, if I don't feel a connection or if I don't feel like I have much in common and I do want to make a connection and better understand their world, going in and saying like, hey, you know, can you give me some feedback on this? Or just like, how are you? Like, do you have people check on you a lot? You know?
Right.
And vice versa, and bridge that gap, because what we're all doing is important. And what we're all doing takes hours and hours of exhaustion. And what we're all doing is to benefit the success of our students.
Right.
And so we really do have this big goal, but to be able to bridge that gap and mend it together, that's my goal.
Yeah.
Because we got some work to do.
Like, we get your side and we get your side.
We're all in this together.
We're all on the same team.
Right.
Sometimes it feels like we're on two different teams.
And teammates fight, or teammates don't see eye to eye, or some teammates are new and some people have been there for a long period of time. But to really see both sides of the strengths, and hear everyone's perspective and be able to have that opportunity. Yeah,
I agree. Well, so my shift would be, I would want to ignite a shift in storytelling. Just as far as like, Brene Brown calls it like the story you tell yourself, but also the story we say out loud on social media, the story we tell other teachers, the story I tell myself, all of it. I think we have to change the narrative. It's like we've really hit on a lot here. It has to stop being about what's wrong and what I can't control, and it has to start being about what's right, what's good, and what can you do about it. And so I think that's been the biggest thing, and it's been so inspiring to see all of these teachers and all the teachers we keep getting to work with, how they're looking at things differently instead of just kind of feeling like there's nothing I can do, and they're just completely overwhelmed by everything that we can't control. In education, there's plenty in here that's not right. So much in here that's not right, and hopefully will eventually grow. But I think really changing that narrative, I think is going to pay off in dividends for everybody. I see it on social media, and sometimes, you know, that's one form of expression, but sometimes I don't think that we realize the story that I'm portraying on social media, how that impacts parents who are making the decision whether or not to send their kids to your school or to a different school. Whether it's impacting people who are at the state level who are making decisions, and this is what all their friends who are teachers, and this is what they're posting on social media. Does that impact the decisions that they're making? And then even more so, especially, you know, at middle school, high school level, our students are on Facebook and Instagram, and they're seeing what we're saying, or they're hearing us in the teacher's
room,
lounge. Yeah, they're hearing it. And as we talk to other teachers, I just think sometimes it's natural, obviously, for us to be overwhelmed and frustrated, but it really takes a conscious effort to shift the stories we're telling so that it's positive, or at least it comes to a point where there's a solution coming, and it's not just this inevitable terror and horror that
There's
got
so
afraid of
many
something.
good stories to tell.
Yeah,
So many.
exactly. It's focusing on those, but you have to choose them.
Right.
For sure. Awesome. Well, I appreciate it, ladies. This was fun.
Yeah, this was fun.
We'll do this an annual thing.
Such a great year of
Yes.
podcasts. So I can't wait till, when we wrap up this year's podcast and kind of see how much of an impact they've made as well.
Exactly. Happy holidays.
Thanks for joining us. You can subscribe to the Ignite Project on Apple Podcast, Google Podcast, or Spotify, or watch online at the Polk County Public Schools YouTube channel. To learn more about the Ignite Project and other Polk County Public Schools podcasts, go to polkschoolsfl.com/podcasts.